My historical question for the research project is, what are the lasting effects of the Reconstruction era that are still present in contemporary America? Specifically, I'm going to be focusing on black codes, the rise of the KKK, and the Jim Crow law era, and how these events have led to modern day issues that we have today, like police brutality, for example, employment discrimination, and educational redlining. Um, and this picture that we have here, you can see a KKK member, a member of the White League here, shaking hands over an African American couple. And this is kind of just like a glimpse of what the Reconstruction era was and one of the themes that took place during this era. So, I'm going to start with what the Reconstruction era was. The Reconstruction era took place in the United States from 1865 to 1877. It was immediately after the Civil War ended. It outlined the southern states that would be readmitted to the Union post-Civil War and defined the status of formerly enslaved individuals. And what it was pretty much a result of the southern states, since they were forced to be readmitted to the Union and forced, to abolish slavery. This was kind of their direct response to that, and kind of trying to keep a form of slavery around. What kicked off the Reconstruction era was the Freedmen's Bureau Act. The Freedmen's Bureau Act was established in 1865 in March to assist freed slaves and poor whites in the South by providing food, medical care, and education. Even though it was passed in March though, a lot of formerly enslaved persons didn't even know they were freed until June, a couple months later. That's why we have Juneteenth as a holiday, which just became a federal holiday in 2021 recently, which is one of the direct effects of the Reconstruction era that we see today in America. But the goal of the Freedmen's Bureau Act was to help with the transition from slavery to freedom, but unfortunately it wasn't very effective because of the opposition it faced from white Southerners. Some of the opposition that we see was the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK was founded in 1865 and consisted of white Southerners, and their goal was to have absolute white supremacy, and they achieved this through violent crimes enacted towards African Americans. And before the Civil War, Southern states had slave patrols, which were organized groups of white men tasked with enforcing slave codes and capturing runaway slaves and retrieving them. However, after the Civil War, since slavery was abolished due to the Northern victory, many of these slave patrol members turned to becoming KKK members or sheriffs, so they can still enact violence towards African Americans. And this is significant because a lot of this violence and crimes enacted went unpunished. And it's something that we still see today. But one of the major instances where these crimes went unpunished was the Colfax Massacre in 1873. Basically, in the small town of Colfax, Louisiana, white Democrats were upset because of a loss to the Republicans in an election, and formed a white militia, mostly composed of KKK members and some former Confederate soldiers. Basically, what happened was 150 black people were killed, and of those members, 97 were arrested. Only 9 were convicted, and even though they were convicted, shortly after, these convictions were lifted from a Supreme Court case in 1875, U.S. versus Cruikshank, which deemed it unconstitutional. So ultimately, these crimes went unpunished. No one was held responsible, even though hundreds of African Americans were murdered. Another thing we had during the Reconstruction era were black codes. These were a set of racially and discriminatory laws that were passed in former Confederate states to restrict the freedoms of freed men. Some of these were labor contracts, which forced African American into contracts, and if they were to break these contracts, they would be arrested and put in prison. Another big one is restrictions on occupations. Basically, African Americans were mostly restricted to jobs in agriculture and heavy labor, and they were restricted from having skilled trade jobs. And because of this, they had to rely on their white employers, and it was kind of like a form of slavery. The other thing we had were curfews. Basically, African Americans were not allowed during specific hours of the day, and if they were caught during these hours, they were arrested and put in prison. Another thing was the Jim Crow era. Although it was post-Reconstruction era from 1877 to 1950, it was a direct result of the Reconstruction era and sort of a continuation of black codes. And what they were laws that enforced racial segregation. As shown in these pictures, black people were not allowed in white neighborhoods. They had segregated public spaces like waiting rooms, restaurants, and transportation. Even water fountains, as shown in this picture, were segregated. Some examples of these laws, and these are direct quotes of the laws during this time. Here we have one on intermarriage. All marriage between a white person and a Negro, or between a white person and a person of Negro descent to the fourth generation inclusive, are hereby forever prohibited. Another one on cohabitation. Any Negro man and white woman, or white man and Negro woman who are not married to each other, who shall habitually live in and occupy in the nighttime the same room, shall each be punished by imprisonment. Another big one, we're still on education. The schools for white children and the schools for Negro children shall be conducted separately. Books shall not be interchangeable between the white and colored schools, but shall continue to be used by the race first using them. And another big one, prisons. The wardens shall see that the white convicts shall have separate apartments for both eating and sleeping from Negro convicts. So now I'll be discussing the lasting effects in contemporary America and sort of the relation that this era had in modern day America. So one relation that we see is the Ku Klux Klan and police brutality. One thing that we see is police brutality going unpunished, and shootings of African Americans, where police officers don't get convicted or punished for. Data shown in one of my sources says that black men are 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed by a police officer than a white man during their lifetime. Of those, black people who were fatally shot by police were twice as likely to be unarmed than their white counterparts. And a case where we have these officers going unpunished was, one of them was Tamir Rice. A 12-year-old boy shot by the police because he was playing with a BB gun in the park and had the police call on him. Evidence shows that it was mentioned that it could have been a BB gun, but regardless, he was shot within seconds of the police arriving on the scene. And the jury declined to indict the police officers who shot him, stating that the force was necessary because of the perceived threat of the 12-year-old boy. These are two other instances where a black man was fatally shot by police officers and jury declined to indict them, completely went unpunished, as shown in the picture here. And as you can see, this picture shows a modern day badge of police officers, very similar to the badge of the runaway slave patrol back then. So, you know, you see a relation there. Similar to the black codes discriminating on hiring black Americans, discrimination on employment still occurs today. Statistics show that people who apply for jobs with distinct black names are less likely to be hired over applications with distinct white names. And a study was done for this. Also, black features also hinder job opportunities due to characteristics such as hairstyles being viewed as unprofessional. For example, cornrows can be seen as unprofessional and, you know, could prevent African American from being hired during an interview. Lastly, we have a similarity with Jim Crow law segregation and educational redlining. Similar to legal segregation in the Jim Crow law era, redlining is still present in the education system today. We see that with district boundaries. So, a kid from a neighborhood, a poor neighborhood maybe, might not be allowed to go to a better school maybe in a better neighborhood. They're forced to go to a school in their district. And as shown in this picture here, in the red, you can see the red line neighborhoods from 1936, and you can see that it's consistent with the blue here, and what the blue shows is areas that have a higher percentage of students of color, and you can see that they match up. So these kids are forced to be going to schools in poorer neighborhoods that might not have, you know, as good of material, newer textbooks. Also, another thing, these schools are more likely to have police officers on campus, which leads to the school to prison pipeline. So a kid going to the school is more likely to be imprisoned as well. So because of these reasons discussed, the Reconstruction era has negatively impacted modern day America. The rise of the KKK, Black Codes, and the Jim Crow era have left a lasting negative impact for the African American population, specifically through police brutality, employment opportunities, and redlining within the public education system. And these are my sources here. And that concludes my presentation.